Well, this morning we're going to look at marriage. And there's just two little sentences in this book of Colossians on marriage. So, yes, your wife dragged you here today, guys. Yes, no, the opposite. So, remember the letters that Paul wrote, he wanted them circulated. So the church in Colossae also got the letter from the Ephesians, and et cetera, the other letters. So there was an extensive teaching in the book of Ephesians on the area of marriage. So Paul didn't feel like I have to do an extensive teaching again. Then it's like, why even look at any of the letters? They're all very similar, but they're also very, very different. And so they have extra information and emphasis in certain places. And it just so happens in this letter, there isn't a great emphasis on marriage as there was in Ephesians. There's two little sentences, verse 18 and 19. Wives, submit to your own husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives. Do not be bitter towards them. You're going, man, those are two short little sentences. And I just say, don't get too excited. I've talked a lot, very long on shorter stuff than this. So, and really, we're just going to concentrate on verse 18. If we don't make it to verse 19, it's really not an important issue, right? There was a pastor that back east who walked out on this stage in his full hockey gear when he was teaching this verse 18. Wives, submit to your husbands, feeling like he needed the protection. It is interesting that when you say that today, wives, submit to your husbands, I've been preaching now for over 40 years, and in our culture changed decades ago where face value, you say that, most women are very offended in our culture. It causes them to get defensive. It causes them to immediately say, man, you can't accept everything the Bible says because we know that is just archaic. That's old time things. That's the mid-ages, you know. And really, it comes down to this word submission and not understanding what it really means. And often when people say, well, this verse, wives submit to your husbands. Well, tell me what you think it means. And they tell me 2 or 3 things they think it means. And I'm like, that's very offensive. If that's the way you understand this word submission, you're right. It is offensive because that is not what the Bible's saying. And so we're going to look at that right now in verse 18. Wives, submit to your own husbands as fitting in the Lord. So first of all, this is a word to the wives. So it's like, husbands, put your hand over your ears. You don't need to hear this. This isn't for you to hear this. In no way, matter of fact, it would be demonic if a man ever said, woman, go read the Bible. You're supposed to submit to me. You're submitting. You listen to me. Go submit to me. That's just demonic. And if you understand the context and understand the word in the Greek and also understand the tense in which it is clearly not saying, men, make sure your wives submit to you. And if they're not submitting at some point in time, give them both barrels and put them in their place. That's just demonic. It really is. So wives, this is for you to know, because it's about you doing this or not doing this. If you're not doing this, if a wife is not submitting to her husband, that still doesn't give the husband the right to tell her, by the way, let's read, what about Colossians chapter 3? Why don't we start in verse 18 today? What do you think, honey? Oh, what do you think that means? No, there's no husbands instructing the wives on how to submit. There's no pressure from a husband to get his wife to submit. This is something that has to come from her own heart out of respect unto God and his will with how he's put the roles in marriage and his divine order in the marriage. And so it's out of a deep spiritual understanding to honor God that she of herself chooses to submit. Secondly, it says to your own husband. Often when people tell me what this says, it says all the women are supposed to submit to all the men. And they immediately think of the Taliban in Afghanistan. The Bible's the same way. Just like the Shia law and the Muslim religion, it's the same thing. Not at all. There is nowhere in the Bible does it say all women need to submit to all men. Wrong. Wives, to your husband, period. No other men are you to be submitting to. That is a complete lie from the pit of hell. But 99% of the time, when people tell me what this verse means, they will tell me it says all the women are supposed to be subservient to all the men, wearing our veil, walking 10 paces behind the men, and just agreeing with whatever they say. Could you imagine what kind of society this would be if we lived a Christian ethic? It's like, again, it's demonic. No, your wife from her own self, wishing to honor God and the way he laid things out, to your own husband only, submit. This word submit is hupotazo, and it is to arrange in order, to put in subordination. It is a military term on how to arrange the divisions of the military leadership. It's put in rank. That's it. Again, it's voluntary. We're not in the military. Your family's not the military, and your husband's not the general. I'm the general. You're just a sergeant. Listen to me. No. It's everybody in the military willingly, joyfully acknowledges the various ranks for order. I mean, understand, guys, you have order or you have disorder. There's really nothing in between. You have order or you have chaos. You don't have a whole lot in between. And so just as the husband is the head of the home, he's the general, so to speak, the wife is the lieutenant, and then the kids are to be subservient to the mom and to the dad. And if you don't have that, you've got chaos. I can't remember which Englishman who visited America back in the 1800s said, I am amazed how perfectly obedient the parents are to their children. And that's what happens. There's a vacuum that comes in, and somebody says, somebody's got to lead this thing or we got chaos. We've got rebellion. We've got nothing if we don't have some leadership here. And God knows that. So he designed the home in leadership rankings. And again, the word hupotazo means subject oneself. So it's not the general telling the lieutenant, get in order. That's not the case here. So this isn't military. It's a military word, but the home is not a military, okay? So I don't want you to think, oh yeah, it's like a military at our house. No. This word's being used in a non-military setting, and it understands the idea of voluntary attitude, of giving oneself into the rank and order. So once again, it's an inward conviction of her own heart to say, the authority in our house, the way God has ordained it, is that I am under rank to my husband. That's the way God's designed it. Submission is not. What is submission is not. It does not mean that the woman is inferior. Matter of fact, the Bible in Galatians 3:28 really is very clear the opposite. In the kingdom of God, there's not the rich, there's not the poor, there's not the Gentiles, there's not the Jews, there's not male nor female. That we, before the Lord, in the Word, in prayer, in worship, in all of life, we're equal. As a matter of fact, in Ephesians, where Paul talks about this in great detail, In Ephesians 5:21, before he talks about the order of the man and the woman, he first says, submit to one another in the fear of God. So really it is more of a team. It really is more of a team together with a very slight underranking. It's not a huge underranking. The husband's way up here and the wife is way down here, and we understand. No, it's very slight. It's very nuanced. As a Christian to a Christian, as a brother to a brother, as a sister to a sister, as the church to the pastor and the pastor to the church. There is not this big, clear, you do what I say when I say because I'm the pastor. You do what I say when I say because I've been a Christian 25 years and you've been a Christian only 10 years. There is not that kind of thing going on. It's a very slight thing. There is such a willingness to yield to one another that it's more of a partnership with a slight ranking in authority. Do we understand this? So submission is not saying that the woman or the wife is inferior. It's not saying that the wife is to be silent. That is, again, ridiculous. And some men, they read this or they've been taught this in a cultish setting, and it's like, I've spoken, don't say another word. Again, there's a submission to one to another. There would never be that attitude in a godly leader of any kind, right? I mean, we look at godly leadership. He is the servant of all. Who's the greatest leader amongst us? It's the one who's serving at the lowest level. That's who's the greatest in God's kingdom. So really being the leader in the home means, husbands, you're denying yourself the most. You're serving the most. You're giving yourself as a servant to your wife more than she is serving you. That's biblical leadership, right? And I'll tell you what, guys, if you've been married longer than a day, you know your wife is so much smarter than you. I mean, I do not know one husband who says, yeah, my wife gets it right once every 10 years. It's like the opposite. My wife's right 100% of the time, and I'm right. I'm really never right. I mean, I've learned through trial and error, and if you're smart, that trial and error period is very short, where you listen to your wife. And because she is much wiser, typically, I do not know why it is, but God has made the women, they're better organizers, they're better eye of detail, they're better communicators, and then they got that sixth sense thing going on. What is that? Trickery. But it's like they can feel it. Ooh, there's a tremor in the force. Look out the window. Somebody's coming. How did you know? It's like, they know. Yeah, the women, believe me, are not to be silent. That would be the worst possible thing in your marriage if you somehow communicated to your wife, don't tell me what you really think. You're a fool if you've communicated that. Submission does not mean, again, that the husband's smarter or better or more talented. Typically, it's the opposite. It would be like a police officer. Is a police officer more of a citizen than I am? Is he a greater American than I am? No. But when he's in the uniform on duty or in the black and white car and he puts the lights on, you fall into rank, right? And you acknowledge his authority is over your authority in that situation. Now, if you're both at a baseball game and he's not in a uniform, you don't know he's a police officer, there is no sense of, hey, his authority is over my authority, right? So in the same way, the husband is not better or smarter or more talented, and so God's taking the smartest of the creation and putting it in charge. No, that is not what's happening. The man was made first, and then the woman was made second to be his helpmate. God created the woman to come alongside and help the man to accomplish what God's given him to accomplish. And in so doing, she accomplishes what it is that she also is supposed to be accomplishing, right? That's the way God originally designed it. Warren Wiersbe says it this way: anyone who has served in the armed forces knows that rank has to do with order and authority, not with value or ability. So again, what is submission? It's God's appointed order, or God's appointed roles in the marriage. Submission means you're in the team together. The family is a team. And as important it is for the kids to see that there's this authority structure. I think there's so many emotional problems today because men aren't wanting to lead because it takes too much work and they're lazy, and it means they have less time to play their video games. And so the wife has to lead, and how confusing that is to the kids. Because when he's around, he takes the lead for 5 minutes. As soon as he's got to make a difficult choice, I'm back into the dungeon playing my video games. Let the wife sort it out. How confusing that is. The kids should see this partnership with this slight submission, and then they come in and they fall into rank as well. Because you make it clear, me and mom are one. If mom says yes, don't come to me to find a no, or vice versa. If I find that mom told you no and you come to me not telling me that, and you try to get a yes out of me and say, oh, dad said I could do it, hey, you're in big trouble. You are under us. We are the team. And you guys fall in rank into this leadership team. How important that is. And so, again, that relationship between the captain of the team and the number one player in the team and the kids seeing all of this. And then the next little phrase, wives, to your own husbands submit, now as is fitting in the Lord. This phrase does not define the limitations of the wife's submission. Some will say, oh, in the Lord, in spiritual things. The wives only submit when it comes to spiritual things. So if we disagree on how a Bible verse is to be interpreted, the husband has complete power here. No, that's not what it's saying. It's defining the motive of the wife's submission, not the limitations. The wife is to submit yourself unto your own husband, because it's your duty to the Lord. Your expression of submission is to the Lord. Why am I submitting to my husband? Because this is what the Lord has instructed me to do. Do we get that? I mean, guys are idiots. I mean, this is not a small thing for the women to have to do. When they're smarter, when they're better organized, when they communicate better. They're natural leaders. And yet, they've got to wait for the husband to lead and follow his lead. That's a difficult thing for women to have to do. And so it really does take a command from God to take orders from somebody that typically is not as qualified as they are for the job. And that's my experience in life and many others as well. And so, God, I'm submitting because I want to honor your word and I want to honor your authority. I am honoring you by placing myself in rank under my husband because this is my Christian duty and my Christian discipleship as a disciple of Christ. Part of taking up my cross and following Jesus is putting myself under rank to this authority. So this is probably the most crucial phrase in this passage. There are two ways that often it's interpreted wrong. One way is as to the Lord. Submit to your husband as is fitting in the Lord, as you would to God himself. Boy, cult leaders love this. You know, they always try to get that ratio going. Okay, I as your leader am as God. And you guys do what I say as if I were God. It's demonic. So sometimes husbands are that way. They come into the home. I think that's the way it was in Paul's time. I mean, from what we know culturally of Paul's time, that's the way it was. The dad was a hardcore leader. And he came into the house and barked out orders to the kids and to the wives and to the servants. And, you know, he's a tough dude and he's not going to ever see him cry.